Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch scale figure of Princess Leia Organa Yavin Ceremony outfit. Villa Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there and thanks for visiting Villa Varykino. I love the nostalgic Kenner-inspired packaging of the Vintage Collection, but sometimes it does get in the way of actually eventually opening up my figures. All too often I excitedly bring them home, decide to put them away somewhere because I just enjoy looking at the backing cards, and then I just never get around to opening them up. So this year I'm going through and opening up all of the figures I actually intended to eventually open up. But I have to say this one hurts a little bit. I am a big Princess Leia fan, so I did buy this one to keep as a carded example. But something happened with this particular wave. All of the carded figures we bought from this particular assortment, including the Sith Trooper, Shadow Trooper, and Jawa, we think that they got damp somewhere in the distribution chain because they all went quite moldy, especially on the backing cards, very shortly after we got them home. We always treat our Star Wars collectibles with care and attention, keeping them away from sunlight, of course, and humidity, but despite our best efforts, this one deteriorated just too quickly after we got it home. So I'm going to turn it into a positive and have a lot of fun opening up a Leia item to add to my collection because, of course, I am a huge Princess Leia fan. So I'm going to have fun. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll get the figure out of the packaging so we can take a closer look at the details. The packaging for the Vintage Collection line of action figures is, of course, heavily inspired by the original Kenner backing cards of the 1970s and 80s. I have a few examples here of Princess Leia from A New Hope. Please note these have a few subtle differences as these are the locally produced New Zealand versions here. So of course they both have a rectangular shape with a black background. They both have the classic Star Wars logo here at the top and a double chrome racetrack design surrounding the character art on the right hand side of the backing card. For A New Hope, Kenner included a piece of artwork of Luke and Leia in the top right. For the Vintage Collection card here, you can see the modern warning label is cutting that off a little bit. Thankfully, later on, Hasbro moved that warning label underneath the Kenner logo here, so it doesn't obscure that fantastic artwork. For Princess Leia in her white senatorial outfit, the accent color in the vintage line was blue. For this ceremonial version, Hasbro has used a green accent color for the nameplate and behind the figure. On the front of the backing card, we have a really nice image of Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, but of course when it comes to the original trilogy films, Hasbro was a little bit restricted about the number of images they have to use for backing card images. Personally, this one is really pretty. I love how well lit it is. We see a lot of costume details, but unfortunately it is one where Leia is not looking directly towards us. She's looking off to the side and her hand is obscured, presumably presenting the Yavin medal to a rebellion hero, but it is just a little bit cut off, but nonetheless it's well lit. I like the fact that we can see some of the Yavin temple backdrop in the background there, and I really like the fact that we can see her distinctive jewelry and silver belt. So overall, I think that image is really nice. The nameplate for this figure reads Princess Leia Organa in brackets Yavin in a white font on the title plate here, as Hasbro typically uses locations to help identify characters in different outfits, though perhaps more accurately this should be labeled as Yavin IV instead. Inside the bubble we have one Princess Leia figure and one accessory, the Rebellion Yavin medal, which of course Leia doesn't wear herself, but I'm hoping the figure is going to be able to hold it in two hands for a cool recreation of the scene. Moving on to the back of the backing card, you can see this is a slightly older figure, VC164, released when Hasbro was still doing the black style for the back of the backing card. This style was once again heavily inspired by the early Kenner backing card styles, as you can see with the example here. They both have the Star Wars logo at the top, though Hasbro did move it to the left to avoid the hanger cutout, and they both have the double chrome racetrack design surrounding photos of other action figures to collect, just like the original, with the really cool colorful rectangular backdrops there. Though of course, unlike the original that also featured other playsets and vehicles, the modern one has to abide by modern toy restrictions, which includes warning, copyright, barcode, and all of that kind of stuff. So we don't have photos or any other kind of cool imagery in the lower half of the backing card on the Vintage Collection, but I do understand. I kind of still love this nod to the original style here. Just as a quick note, as I mentioned earlier, my backing card for this Leia figure is numbered VC164. This is actually a misprinted version. The correct number for this Leia figure is VC150. The VC164 that is correctly numbered, as I have here, is actually Cara Dune from The Mandalorian. I know for some fans the misprint is a fun quirk that is a little bit more collectible, but unfortunately the condition of my particular example just meant it was better off being opened. Overall, this is a really nice carded figure, and it's just so heartbreaking that I don't have this in just a better condition to keep carded, just with that dampness that's caused that mold. It's just so unfortunate. So of course I'm going to have a lot of fun opening this one up instead. So now I have my Princess Leia Yavin figure out of the packaging, as well as her medal accessory there, so we can take a closer look. So one little note that I must mention, when I was looking at the figure in her bubble, there was some discoloration which was on the inside of the plastic bubble. It looked like mold had gotten in through the backing card, and so I was a little bit relieved to see that that was mostly contained on the plastic, but it was unfortunately resting on the fabric. So looking at it, there is a very small discolored section on this soft goods component. It's a very small yellow sort of section kind of around here. You can just kind of see that. I will, after I've gone through all of the details, probably go and gently remove this and try and hand wash it to see if that will come out. But if it doesn't, I guess that's okay, because I'm probably going to have it sort of tucked in under her arms so that she can hold her accessory. So I don't think it will be that visible. That was just another reason why this was unfortunately destined to be an opener. But while we're on the topic of the soft goods element, I do like it when sort of the flowy layer costumes do include some element of fabric. It just gives it a softness and elegance. I'm not a fan of this one, I have to say. It doesn't feel that elegant. It kind of feels like just sort of like a stocking fabric. It's just kind of like a bit of a stretch mesh, not at all accurate to the fabric of the actual costume. And it's just wildly inaccurate in terms of the shape and style. When you look at it, it's kind of the same shape as the vinyl cape used on the Kenner white dress figure from the 70s, which is not at all accurate to that figure, but nevertheless, it shouldn't be used here either. If you look at the scene in the film and actually watch Leia as she moves, you will know that the soft components sort of flowing over her arms are actually long sleeves. They're kind of like capes that are attached to the front of the dress. They kind of come up over her shoulder and then they hang down. If you ever see shots of her from behind in some of those behind the scenes photos, you will see that there is actually no cape down her back. It is just the dress, and that hangs down her arms. So this as a full cape down the back is completely inaccurate. They should be two sections sort of attached to the bust of the dress hanging down her arms. It kind of works like this, but if you're going to turn her around, it's not accurate. And also the dress in the back should actually flow. It's not so tight. This is quite a narrow column. It does actually have a little bit of a train on it. It should drag a little bit out in the back. Of course, I was very fortunate to be able to see the original costume on display at a couple of different celebration conventions, because the prop store managed to locate the original costume that Carrie Fisher wore. So if you are a fan of Princess Leia or Princess Leia's outfits from the original trilogy, that was absolutely fascinating to see it in person. So I took lots of photos, so I am a little bit more familiar about the costume. And something that was a little bit hidden while this figure was in the packaging, but again, I know that costume. This one has another inaccuracy. Now in the film, everyone knows Leia's very distinctive necklace made by the company Laponia. What some fans don't really notice is the fact that she's actually wearing a matching bracelet in the scene as well, also made by Laponia. It is known as Darina's bracelet, also made in the 70s, but this figure does not have it at all. She's got bare wrists on both arms. Now you don't actually see it in the backing card because they have the image of Leia kind of facing this way, with this arm being visible and this arm cut off behind where the figure is packaged in the bubble. So the backing card doesn't show the fact that she's very clearly wearing a silver bracelet. You do really notice it in the scene where she is placing the medal around Han Solo's neck. So it's really unfortunate that that is not here. It's such a, you know, noticeable item because it's such a bright silver. It is quite a thick bracelet. It's really unfortunate, and yeah, I do like my Princess Leia figures, especially to be accurate to how we see them on screen, especially since we've had many decades to familiarize ourselves with the costumes, especially from A New Hope. So the other little element that's kind of grabbing my attention, again as a costume detail, is of course Leia wears a very similar belt in her ceremony dress as she wears with her white dress that she wears for most of the film. That one has a white base and silver plates. When she is wearing her ceremonial gown, she has a silver belt with silver plates. And on this figure, I don't really get a sense of the silver belt. I can kind of see the groove lines, the kind of sculpting lines where the sort of the base layer for the belt is, but it's not really showing up as silver. It kind of feels more like the definitive sort of silver sort of plates on a belt. It doesn't really look like it's got a silver background to it, which is unfortunate. It looks a little bit sort of closer in the back because the plates are all closer together, but there's sort of this little section here just above the top of this belt where I feel like that should be a little bit more filled in with silver. It's the kind of thing that it's not really terribly inaccurate. It's probably just a little bit of a quirk of the paint job on my particular figure. I'm only noticing it when I'm looking really, really close up and just sort of feeling like there should be just a little bit more silver in this area. Of course, when I put her on display, I'm probably not going to notice that. That's just a little bit of a close-up thing, but it is that bracelet that's missing that is bothering me. So as you can see, the soft goods is not actually anchored the way that mine was packaged. I thought it might be sort of glued or connected somehow in around her shoulders, but in moving her arms, you can see that it is going to slide off. So I'm going to do sort of like a quick look at the figure, and then I might just very carefully remove it because, as I often say, I don't want to damage soft goods. This one won't fray like some of the other capes and things like that we get across the Vintage Collection and Black Series 6-inch line, but I just don't want to damage it just because it's not fragile, but it's just very thin and light, and I don't want to sort of snag it or catch it, particularly in the moving articulation around the shoulders there. So overall, I have to say, I kind of wish this dress, it looks white on screen and it's not too bad with the white fabric of the sort of cape draping section here around it, but to my eyes in person, it looks a lot more yellow. So I'm just going to quickly grab a recent Princess Leia figure. This is the fantastic VC316 from that fantastic A New Hope line, and you can kind of see just how different the color is. I really like the stark white of this. I know this costume isn't quite as white, but it's actually looking a little bit more yellow to my eyes. Thankfully, it's not as yellow on screen. And I know this figure is a few years old, but again, I keep my figures away from sunlight. I don't like the feeling like I'm almost a little bit worried that this might yellow a little more over time. I guess I'll just have to wait and see. I think the scale of these figures is just interesting, just for a little bit of a quick comparison. In terms of height, you can see that they are very close in height, but this figure, they have gone very, very small with the proportions. We don't even have articulation here in the wrists like we do for this one, of course, and the actual waist and hips are so much smaller than this recent version. I know it's a different fit of dress, but she's just feeling very thin. She kind of reminds me of some of the female characters that we got in that Rebels animated style line of figures. Characters like the seventh sister, she is so thin, she can barely stand up. She's got these really thin arms, and it kind of makes me feel like this. And I wish that we had just a little bit more you can see there's absolutely no articulation that I'm going to be able to access. If there is anything in the legs, there's absolutely no point because this is a solid plastic. This is just a column. Technically, there are legs under there because we've got feet sticking out. But for the Vintage Collection line, I generally anticipate having more articulation. She's already missing some here in the wrists. We've got nothing there in the legs. It's a little bit unfortunate. Of course, I often mention that I'm not a fan of these splits up the side in the rubbery skirts, but on this particular Leia figure, that is actually accurate. There are actually side splits up the side of the skirt to about the knee section, so that does work, and we do have articulation on this figure underneath that you can kind of work with by using that. Now this one doesn't have splits, so it is accurate, but I know she's not going to be doing sort of high kicks or action moves. She doesn't do that much movement at all during the Yavin ceremony, but of course if you are a little bit unfortunate with the position of her feet and legs underneath that, she's going to stand not very straight because she is actually resting on her shoes here. So you can see that the shoes are just below the skirt. So if the legs underneath are not balanced well, she's going to have trouble standing up because she's not just sitting on that plastic sort of column there. But let's go through the details. I'm just going to keep this one on hand a little bit because I usually go straight in with the face. And again, I hate to be sort of negative when it comes to especially Princess Leia collectibles, because I'm always really excited to be able to add anything Princess Leia to my collection. This one does have the modern sort of photoreal digital printing, but she kind of has a stern face and very dark face makeup, which I don't feel is quite right for this figure. I kind of wish she was smiling. It is a celebration. We do see her smiling. Even on the backing card she is smiling, and I just think this new modern likeness is just so much better. A softer printing so it doesn't look so dark around the eyes, and just the likeness feels a lot more, you know, it feels like a lot closer to Carrie Fisher for this likeness. In terms of the hair color, they are different as well. Very dark on this one, a little bit lighter on this one. It's hard to say which one is more accurate. In some scenes, her hair almost looks black in some scenes because it's so dark brown. But of course, yeah, it's just interesting. I think this one is a much better sculpt, and I know the hair is separate on this piece, I think, or at least the buns are. So I kind of wish that, you know, they could basically take this fantastic face sculpt and reissue some of the other Leia figures just by doing different hair pieces to just kind of give us a little bit of a better face sculpt. Again, the scale is very different. The face on this one's just very small, which kind of fits the overall slender, sort of smaller scale of this figure. But it doesn't feel quite like Carrie, especially when you put it alongside this one. I know I'm not going to have these two side by side in terms of recreating scenes, but perhaps if you're putting together a Princess Leia Focus collection, these might end up side by side, and they really do just look like from completely different eras. I know there is a few years between these two figures, but they're from the same action figure line, the Vintage Collection. So if you're just collecting Vintage Collection Leia figures, these two are going to look kind of a little bit odd side by side. So I love this figure. I will have the full review of this figure linked down below, but I'll probably pop her aside so we can properly go through the details here. So as I already mentioned, not a lot of articulation, some missing elements, but let's just go through the rest. She does have this separate hair section. She's got, of course, Leia has a lot of braids in the original trilogy. She's kind of got this stacked kind of circle, sort of almost like a bowl of hair, sort of braids sort of stacked up on the back of her head, and a long trailing braid running down the back. Personally, I would think that this is a little bit longer when we see her kind of leaning over giving the medals. It's kind of hanging down a little bit lower down her back, but I think that that is an okay length. It's not completely accurate, I would say, and perhaps just a little bit longer. There is a little bit of flex to it because it is very thin, but of course the hair is glued on quite nicely there. We do have an unfortunate, or at least on my figure, kind of like a sculpting mold line that just cuts across the hair right in front of where that hairpiece is attached. So it just kind of cuts in, and it's just kind of a little bit unfortunate that it wasn't just a little bit further towards the back of the head where it would be kind of covered more completely by this hairpiece, because it just kind of looks like a cut through her hair, which is unfortunately just distracting my eye a little bit. In terms of painting around the hairline, it is pretty clean on my figure here, but I just don't like that face paint. She looks so solemn. I know that theoretically this is a scene after Alderaan is destroyed, so perhaps she has a moment of sort of, you know, sadness, but as we see her on screen, she doesn't look quite this stern. Moving on to that iconic necklace. Now, I love this necklace. I wish I owned a real one, but the painting on this one is reasonably good, but not complete. Unfortunately, the skin tone color is showing through in a few places, just every now and again. I'm looking up very close. Every now and again, the silver is not completely covering it, especially in this section here where we've got just sort of a splash of skin color cutting through the necklace, particularly on this shoulder. It's a little bit better in the back, frustratingly, because I'm not really going to see it there. And there is just a sort of a little bit of an echo of the fabric sort of color kind of coming through along her sort of bust line here. I feel like that skin tone should be just a little bit tighter and cleaner against the sculpting line of the strap of her dress, particularly in this corner. But of course, it's completely separate in terms of at the shoulders, so it's nice and clean there. Just on my figure, that could have been just a little bit cleaner and tighter. So I think the time has come to take this sort of extra fabric section off. It does kind of sit in front of her hands a lot, which I guess kind of works because in the real one it's kind of these sort of sections of fabric hanging down, but I'm going to have to kind of really work with it to get it to sit into a right position. You kind of want to sort of pull it back kind of like this and then kind of pull it back. It's kind of making it look like a little bit of sort of like an odd Jedi cloak of sorts, and it's kind of flicking up a lot. I'm kind of going to have to, I guess, kind of pull it something like that. Now that actually doesn't look too bad. Got a little bit of extra fabric here and kind of pull it back like a cloak behind her a little bit. I feel like that's a little bit more accurate, but it's very long in the back. I think it's kind of doing sort of extra duty for the fact that the dress itself doesn't have a train. We've kind of got this flowing out the back. It's very particular. I think I'm going to have to work with this one a lot to really get it into a position for display that I feel looks tidy. And if you get it in just the wrong position, it kind of looks like you took a square of tissue paper and kind of tried to make a cloak for an action figure out of it. So it's definitely going to take a little bit of work to get this one sitting right. And I kind of want my figures to look pretty out of the packaging, especially for Princess Leia. So I'm just going to see how carefully I can pull this down over her sleeves. It's pulling a little bit in the back. Just going to try and avoid pulling it. It is a stretch fabric, and I'm hoping it's not going to be too hard to put it back on. So here we can see the shape of it. We've got these two little small holes cut out. It's basically a rectangle. I guess if you're brave, you could, you know, take a photo of this and go to your local fabric store and try and find something similar, and perhaps try your hand at cutting something with a bit of a shape that's like a little bit more tapered in the back to kind of draw away that bulk that really shouldn't be there behind the figure. I'm not too brave to go around customizing my figure, so I'm probably just going to be using the one that Hasbro included. It is just a little bit unfortunate that they didn't put a little bit more effort into trying to recreate a bit more of an accurate drape. So of course, now with that off, we can look a little bit more closer at all of the sculpting detail. You can see the belt going around the back. It's all painted silver, which is nice. I think we've got a little bit more of an infill of silver in the back, particularly in the center, which I like to see. We've got some nice draping here in the back of the bodice. That's nice. It's a little bit hidden by her hair, but I like that. The actual column sort of skirt section here, we've just got a few small drapes. It is a very clean, smooth dress in the film, so I'm not expecting a lot of drapes and gathers, and also just the sort of dress fabric doesn't have a thick, obvious texture to it, like we see on, say, Jawa cloaks and things like that, where you get that really cool sort of thicker texture. I'm not expecting anything here, and I do like the fact that they've at least included some of the stitching lines, the sewing lines on the bodice. It's just unfortunate because this section is actually where that soft goods sort of cape sleeve should be attached across the bodice at the front here, but we've got all this kind of slight wrinkling there, which looks pretty good. Just, yeah, it's just a hard costume to try and replicate in a small action figure form. I know there have been several versions over the years. This one is perhaps not my favorite. I don't know if it's maybe just the fact that it's mesh that's kind of throwing me off. It's not a sort of doesn't feel quite as elegant as the, you know, the sort of the fancy fabric that is actually used in the original costume. That skirt, it's just such a tight column, which is really unusual for the vintage collection. You know, so much articulation just completely missing off this figure. Now, taking a look at those little silver shoes, she's got little heels on them, which is accurate. So she's standing up a little bit taller because Carrie Fisher's not tall. But yeah, I can't really show much else. You can see that there is a skin-toned pair of legs in there, but I don't even think there are knees. I don't think there are articulated knees, certainly none in the ankles there. There's just nothing. Even if you were trying to sort of, I know for some figures with plastic skirts, if you are brave and adventurous, sometimes you can remove the plastic skirt and give it a soft goods skirt so that you can articulate the legs underneath, but there's just absolutely no reason. There is nothing hidden underneath that to really utilize. Maybe someday in the future, Hasbro will maybe take another go at this figure with the better likeness and maybe give us a soft goods skirt and maybe even a slightly different sort of cape sleeve design there as well. So overall, I always love layer figures, but this one is just I'm a little bit conflicted on it. Don't think the likeness is the best that Hasbro has done. I think that VC316 is so much better. The scale of this figure is very small, which I don't know. I probably need to maybe put this alongside a lot of other figures and see how it feels, but it's definitely on the smaller side compared to that A New Hope white dress layer that we got more recently. Especially since we are missing articulation at the wrists here. I mean, we've got lots of other slender female character figures and they do have a wrist articulation, but of course not very many Star Wars characters have completely bare arms, so perhaps Hasbro decided that they wanted a bit more of a cleaner look. Though of course, if they had sculpted the bracelet on this right wrist where it should be, that would give them a clean line to add that articulation in, and then you would only have this one to deal with sort of breaking up the clean line on her bare forearm there. So let's test out the minimal articulation that this figure has. Okay, so quite stiff on the neck, but she is, you know, a little bit of an older figure. She's been trapped in her plastic for a while. So she can turn around. There is quite sort of a gap, you know, kind of at the base of the neck. That braid is not really hitting much. Kind of have to turn it all the way before it's going to hit there. And there is enough flex that we can even sort of pull it over the front if we really, really wanted to. She's turning a little bit, strangely there. But yes, it kind of has a little bit of a creak to my figure. I'm sure it will loosen up. Front and back, not too bad. It's not hitting anywhere. That's just kind of a little bit at the back of the neck with the hair. But yeah, pretty reasonable there for the head articulation. I'm going to just jump ahead and have a look at the waist. That's very smooth. It turns very easily there. Does look odd because she's sort of a very sort of an oval shape across, so when she turns it's suddenly looking very odd, and we don't really need to sort of twist her around a lot because she's not moving that much during the Yavin ceremony. Let's test out the arms, because let's face it, this is going to be the most important thing if we're going to recreate the ceremony. Perhaps she is leaning forward, placing a medal around Han Solo or Luke. These feel thin and small. That's very unusual. Okay, so she lifts her arms up quite high. Let's see. Yeah, they're just so small. I can actually get quite tight up against the body there. She can go quite high up in the air. Let's bring those down. Let's test out the elbows. I'm going to be very careful because these are just such small articulation points, very gingerly kind of encouraging movement there. I really don't want to bend them. Oh, this one's a bit tight. Okay. Oh, this looks like this might be a good position for holding the ribbon section on the Yavin medal. I really, that's the pose I want, is her sort of holding it out in front of her. So I can, let's see, yes, I can swivel her sort of arms there at the elbows. But if I'm going to hold the medal, then we kind of want the hands together at the front. But of course, I'm really hoping that the hands are in the right orientation to grip that medal, because I can't rotate them in any direction. So of course, she doesn't come with a blaster. We never see her holding any kind of weapon in this particular outfit in the film. So she doesn't have an extended trigger finger. She's just got a soft kind of grip. It's not even a sort of a tight C grip for a lightsaber. You can kind of see the shape on her hands there. Just a nice kind of grip. I'm hoping that's going to hold that really well, because that's basically the one pose that I'm going to want to recreate with this figure, either with her sort of arms down by her side, sort of more towards the end of the film when she has given out the medals and, you know, the figures in front of her are going to be wearing them, or it's going to be sort of a mid-ceremony where she is presenting those medals. You can see just how well in front that hair kind of, it doesn't touch the back. It kind of follows the curve of her back there, which I guess is good, giving us a bit of breathing room for that soft goods component there, so it's not right up hard against it. But yeah, just a few things about this one that are just a little bit off. It's just a little bit unfortunate, and it was just, this is kind of one of the reasons why I had really intended to keep this one carded, because I could just sort of tell through the packaging that the soft goods cape was just going to be a little bit odd because of just the style that they chose to do it for this figure. So there she is. I'll probably put the cape back on her very quickly. Going to be very careful with that one, and then we'll check out how well she's going to hold that medal. So I took just a moment to put the soft goods cape back on the figure. I have to say, once you've got her hands sort of more to the forward, it kind of has a little bit of a better shape. Her arms are sort of holding it in place. So I think this is definitely going to be the pose that I'm going to use. Because this has a little bit of an open weave, it is a mesh, so there are lots of tiny little holes. You do have to be careful, because the very kind of little prickly ends to her tiny fingers are a little bit prone to catching on it. I had to really take my time to get her those hands through the little holes that are cut in for the arms there, but once I got them in, it looks kind of pretty, just not very accurate. So I'm really hoping she's going to hold this and it'll kind of come together in the end. So of course we now have the Yavin medal, or Rebel Alliance medal. This one looks really cool. So I thought it might be rubbery. It does have a little bit of a flex to it, but it actually feels kind of rigid. I don't think I'm going to sort of flex it much to get it over the head. So of course Leia herself isn't going to wear it, and she does have kind of high hair, so I'm not sure that I'm going to even really be bothered trying to fit it over her. But of course it does look, you know, appropriately sized. It's got a nice sort of natural curve into it. So if you've got a Luke or Han figure, this should fit over them because they've got much shorter hair compared to Leia, and that curve means that it's going to sort of rest on the chest nicely there. The sculpting on it, we can kind of see some of the detail. It's very tiny. It's not a shiny sort of jewelry gold. It's a little bit of a darker tone, but it is a metallic gold. I quite like that. And we've got sort of like a caramel brown ribbon here. Some versions of it kind of has a little bit more of a green tone to the ribbon, but you know, unless you've ever seen a real one on display at a Lucasfilm exhibition, the colors, particularly in the original trilogy, can be sort of hotly debated as to what the accurate color is. I've often seen it described as sort of more of an olive ribbon here, but the brown, it does work. It looks fine, and I do like the metallic finish there. The details look fine. It's kind of an interesting design, but of course if you flip it over, you can see that gold paint, and there is the number 4 erased in the back there, but this looks pretty fine. I'm just hoping she will hold it well. So of course, because we can't rotate her hands, I'm just a little bit nervous about how well she's going to hold this. So I'm going to just give it a quick little go, just trying to sort of put it in her thumbs mostly, just to kind of see if she's going to hold it. Of course, I generally spend a little bit of time working with my figures just to get them into a better pose with a little bit of effort. that's not too bad, just for sort of a quick go. She does kind of grasp it with her sort of her thumb mostly. You can kind of see how I've gotten that into her grips there. And it kind of, I guess if I pull her sort of arms up, I'll be able to sort of raise it up because we do have that curve. So it kind of wants to sort of hang down a little bit more like that. So I'll probably spend just a moment or two kind of getting this into the right position, because this is going to be the way that I want to display her. And she's just got such small hands and I don't want to catch anything on this. So let's just quickly get this into the position that I think works the best for her. So it is a little tricky to get her to hold it in the position that I like, because I can't rotate her at the wrists. And I have to say, because this particular accessory is curved to sort of follow the chest contour of a recipient, it kind of wants to tuck in close to her. I kind of wish that perhaps they had been able to include two accessories, one with a straight ribbon for Leia to hold and one for a curved one to put on a recipient. And of course I have it posed here with the face of the medal facing outward. If she was putting it on a recipient, she would have that detail facing herself so that it would be on the right way when she puts it on somebody. But of course, if I'm just putting her on display, I'm probably going to want the more prettier side of the medal facing out. And now that I've got her arms into position, I was able to kind of pull this soft goods component a little bit more tightly behind the figure, so it looks a little less like a big blowy cape and just a sort of tucking that all kind of hiding it behind the figure on display. So it just looks a little bit more minimal, which I think works really well. So there are a few quirks with this figure, but it's really hard for me to just downright hate a Leia figure, and I really don't ever want to use that word about Princess Leia. So I'll say this isn't perhaps my favorite, but I am still really happy to have this one in my collection. She doesn't have, you know, very many outfits in A New Hope, just these two. So of course they're iconic, they're absolutely beautiful, but just seeing what Hasbro was able to achieve with this most recent senatorial gown, VC316, I would love to see them create a newer version of this ceremonial version there, because I just think, just with the, I know this one has digital face printing, but I feel like they've really improved on even the digital printing over the years, because this one is just fantastic. And I just feel like it's a softer look, not quite as harsh, particularly around the eyes, and it just feels a lot more like Carrie Fisher as Leia. And I feel like it would be absolutely beautiful to have a version of this outfit with this level of detail and accuracy, and of course articulation. Though I do often say I don't mind slightly limited articulation if it means that I do have the accuracy, but then this figure just isn't accurate. I don't think the shape of the skirt is quite accurate. I think there should be just a little bit more fullness to the bottom of the skirt, perhaps a little bit of a train in the back, and of course we are missing the bracelet. And I don't know quite how well they would be able to sort of improve on this soft goods component to do the tiny little sleeves. I think perhaps in that case it would have to be sort of anchored in at the shoulders somehow to be able to do those two very small sort of capelet sleeves for this figure, but who knows, maybe they will give it another go. I certainly hope so, because A New Hope, I know it's not a Kenner original figure, but A New Hope is just so nostalgic, the original trilogy especially. And yeah, I just was so sad at the condition of my backing card that I knew that I would probably feel much happier getting her out and posed, and even with that small little mark on the soft goods component, it's completely hidden when I sort of pose it like this, so I'm not even sure that I really want to risk damaging it by washing it. It's fine like this. So all in all, it has its interesting elements, but I'm still happy to have a recent, or at least a little bit better than some of the other versions we've had in the past. Some of those plastic capes and things like that from the 90s era, they were fun and quirky, not the best in my opinion, but this one it's pretty. It does look pretty. I like the way that I've managed to get the soft goods to kind of fall by her side. I just wish it was a little bit accurate and the face was a little bit more sort of appropriate for Carrie Fisher in that scene. I would love to see it a little bit more of a smile like it is on the backing card. especially if you like to keep your figures mint on card. I really want to see the figure looking as close as possible to the reference image packaged right beside it. Of course, we just sort of want the backing card image to be a good representation of the figure, and she is smiling on the backing card. So yeah, I wish I'd been able to keep this one carded because I love that smiling image of Carrie Fisher, but now I do have another figure to add to my loose action figure display, and that's always a positive thing. So there you go. Another layer for my collection. Once again, that's always a good thing in my book. So thank you so much for hanging out with me as I opened up another vintage collection figure and had an interesting time checking out the details. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a vintage collection fan, I've also opened up the A New Hope Princess Leia figure VC316. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole vintage collection playlist. This is the way.